Greetings, quiet wanderers of the moonlit paths. May the mellow winds of Oldenwick drift softly around your thoughts as we step together into a forgotten age, where the earth whispered secrets into the hands of simple farmers, and where vegetables, those humble companions of every wooden bowl, held powers so astonishing that the great agricultural guilds of our modern era would one day spend fortunes to bury their memory, not because these plants were dangerous, but because they were too potent, too nourishing, too stubbornly independent to fit the neat boxes and predictable rhythms of factory fields. And as you let your body sink deeper into stillness, perhaps upon a pillow that feels like a patch of gentle moss, imagine candle-lit kitchens, worn wooden tables, wind-beaten cottages at the edge of far-off medieval villages, and the soft murmurs of cooks and healers who understood the land in ways long forgotten. For tonight we wander slowly, ever so slowly, into the lost gardens of our ancestors, where the vegetables were 10 times stronger than anything engineered today, and where each leaf and root carried the quiet dignity of centuries. And so, dear traveller, our tale begins with a small, unassuming plant that medieval folk praised as if it were a gift from the heavens themselves. A bright green rascal known as Plain, a mischievous little herb whose plump leaves shimmered under the morning frost, and whose presence at the edge of every garden was as comforting as the crackling fire inside every cottage. For peasants cherished it, not because they had studied vitamins or fatty acids, but because they felt in their bones that it strengthened them in winter, soothed their aches, kept their minds sharp, and tasted like the very essence of the fields they tended from dawn until the stars returned. And as you imagine the soft crunch, the crunch, as the elders whispered in their old tongue of those thick leaves breaking between calloused fingers, know that this modest plant held more omega-3 fatty acids than many fish that swam the cold northern seas, more vitamin E than the proudest spinach leaf, and more beta-carotene than the boldest carrot in the garden. And yet today, long after medieval farmers relied on it for vitality, people spray it with herbicide and call it a weed, as if centuries of wisdom could be dismissed with a careless boot step. But in those distant days, lit only by torches and hearth-fires, Peasants grew freely among stones and roots, laughing silently at droughts, storms, and poor soils, thriving where other vegetables withered and giving itself generously to families who depended on every green sprig they could find. And the sight of its dew-covered leaves in the pale morning light offered not just nourishment but reassurance. Reassurance that despite the harshness of the world, some things remained loyal, resilient, and quietly miraculous. And so, as the night grows calmer around you and your eyelids grow a little heavier, picture Peasants nestled along the worn pathways of ancient gardens, a forgotten treasure that once kept entire communities strong. A simple plant whose power was so immense that the modern world had no place for it. And this is merely the beginning of our long journey through the banned vegetables of the medieval world, each one stranger, stronger, and more wondrous than the last. And now, gentle wanderers of the dim evening hours, may the mellow hush of Oldenwick guide your thoughts as we travel deeper through the forgotten gardens of the past. For there was once a peculiar root treasured by medieval cooks and healers alike, a quiet marvel called salsify, spoken of in those days as the land's imitation of the sea, because its delicate white flesh carried a faint whisper of oyster-like flavor, even though it had never known the taste of salt water. And while the people of distant centuries gathered it from cold, damp soil with reverent hands, modern agriculture rejected it entirely, not due to danger or lack of value, but because salsify dared to grow at its own slow, unhurried pace, taking 8 or 9 patient months to reach maturity, a rhythm far too gentle for today's industrial fields that demand speed, uniformity, and predictable profits. If you close your eyes and breathe slowly, you might almost picture the villagers of long ago bending over their gardens at sunrise, lifting salsify from the earth with a quiet sense of gratitude, for they knew its tender roots carried more fiber than most vegetables grown today, and contained prebiotic compounds that kept their digestive systems strong without the aid of powders, pills, or supplements. and they understood, instinctively and without scientific charts, that this plant nourished them in a way that was both physical and deeply comforting, like a soft wool cloak wrapped around their bodies during winter. The taste of salsify, gentle and strange, was unlike anything else on medieval tables, and cooks roasted it in clay ovens, fried it in butter, or simmered it in thick stews until its subtle ocean-like aroma drifted through small stone kitchens, lit only by firelight, and nobility prized it as a delicacy, while farmers valued it as a dependable ally in seasons when food was scarce. Yet the modern world cast it aside, preferring vegetables that grow quickly, look identical, stack neatly in shipping crates, and wait obediently under fluorescent lights, traits that salsify never bothered to develop, because it belonged to an era where nature, not industry, dictated the pace of life. And so, as you drift toward rest, imagine this slender root resting beneath the medieval earth, waiting month after month beneath the slow-turning skies, drawing strength from cold soil and gentle rains, carrying within it the quiet resilience that once kept entire communities nourished during harsh winters. And consider how, in the long rush toward efficiency and convenience, the world forgot not only its flavor, but the patient wisdom it represented. The salsify teaches us that real nourishment takes time, that slow growth often yields the deepest strength, and that some of the greatest treasures of the earth are the ones modern agriculture has chosen to ignore, simply because they refuse to be rushed. And now, noble dream traveler drifting further along the moonlit paths of Elder March, may the gentle hush of the night cloak you like a woolen mantle, as we wander from roots to herbs, arriving at a towering green marvel that medieval folk cherished with a devotion bordering on reverence, a plant so fragrant, so versatile, and so mysteriously powerful that old healers called it the physician's blessing, and cooks spoke of it in hushed admiration. A plant known as lovage, whose tall stems and bold leaves once dominated cottage gardens, the way a wise elder dominates a crowded hall, offering comfort, nourishment, and medicine, all at once in an age when every useful plant was a quiet miracle. If you let your imagination soften, you can almost see how lovage rose proudly at the edges of medieval fields, its scent drifting on the wind like a promise of healing, for this herb, taller and stronger than humble celery, was considered a sort of overachieving cousin to every other aromatic plant, delivering such an intense flavor that a single leaf could do the work of 10 celery stalks, making soups richer, broths deeper, and stews more alive with that warm, sharp, ancient taste that seemed to come from a time older than language itself. And yet modern agriculture grew uneasy at the thought of such a powerful herb that needed no fertilizers, no coaxing, no industrial support, for lovage grew almost too easily, too persistently, thriving even in poor soil, as though it were laughing gently at the idea of dependence. In medieval households, lovage was not simply a seasoning but a kind of sacred companion, because every part of the plant had a purpose. The leaves used for robust flavor, the stems cooked like a noble vegetable, the seeds brewed into teas that soothed troubled stomachs, and the roots ground into remedies for aching joints or kidneys worn down by hard work. And the remarkable part, something modern pharmaceutical shelves rarely admit, is that old folk wisdom was correct. For lovage contains natural anti-inflammatory compounds, such as quercetin, that modern research now recognizes as genuinely powerful, meaning the peasants and healers of those candlelit centuries were practicing real science long before anyone wrote it down. Perhaps the most wondrous quality of lovage, whispered about in taverns and gardens alike, was its extraordinary longevity. For once planted, lovage returned year after year like a loyal guardian, asking nothing in return yet giving endlessly, which made it a threat to the ambitions of modern seed companies whose profits depend on crops that must be purchased again and again. And so, over time, lovage faded from popular use, not because it lacked value, but because it offered too much value, too easily, too freely, an herb that nourished families without creating dependence on agricultural industries that prefer plants which obey the rigid rhythms of mass production. And as you lie there, letting your thoughts drift like lanterns on a slow river, imagine Lovage towering quietly in the corner of a medieval garden, its leaves rustling softly in the night breeze, offering strength, comfort, and medicine to every family that tended it. A green sentinel that never demanded attention yet always provided it, and reflect on how, in forgetting this magnificent herb, we may also have forgotten a piece of the natural wisdom that once guided our ancestors through hardships, teaching them, and now gently teaching you that sometimes the most powerful remedies grow in silence, needing no permission, no approval, and no modern seal to prove their worth. And now, gentle wayfarer of the drowsing hours, may the soft lantern light of old Hearthvale warm your thoughts as we wander from sharp herbs to sweetness, stepping into the quiet tale of a root so beloved by medieval kings and queens that they guarded it as though it were a chest of precious jewels, a pale, delicate treasure called Skirret, whose natural sweetness once enchanted the great halls of nobility, glowing beneath chandeliers of tallow and silver, while humble farmers, knowing its worth, tended it with a pride that needed no words, for this root held a flavour both gentle and bright, like honey whispered into vegetable form, and its memory drifts faintly even now through the ancient kitchens of Europe. If you allow your mind to settle slowly into that distant world, you might picture long wooden tables inside stone castles, where cooks wearing woolen sleeves and soot-stained aprons carried steaming dishes filled with roasted skirret, each piece offering a soft crunch that felt perfectly balanced between carrot and parsnip, yet infused with a sweetness so honest, so natural, that royalty would often request it over more extravagant desserts. And while modern agriculture later turned towards sugarcane and beets that could be mass-produced quickly, the medieval palate recognized in Skirret a purity and warmth that could never be replicated by crops engineered for speed rather than flavor. This root, slender and branching like ivory fingers reaching into the soil, was unusually rich in inulin, a natural fiber that kept the digestive system calm and steady, making Skirret beloved not only for its taste, but for the way it left the body comfortable and light, and in an age when medicine was simple and nourishment was precious. This quiet root earned a reputation as both food and healer, a rare combination that allowed it to travel gracefully across the social classes, equally welcome at the king's table and the peasant's hearth. Yet, despite all its virtues, Skirret was abandoned by modern agriculture for a painfully simple reason. It takes its time, growing best in cool climates, and requiring months of patience before its sweetness forms fully, a rhythm entirely at odds with modern farming, which demands vegetables that can be counted, packed, shipped, and sold according to the precise tempo of markets and machines. And so the ancient root was cast aside, not because it failed, but because it refused to hurry, refused to compromise, refused to bend to the unnatural urgency that governs the fields of today. And so, as your breathing softens and your thoughts drift across the gentle fields of imagination, picture Skirret resting beneath the medieval soil, waiting through long winter nights and bright summer dawns, gathering its sweetness slowly and honestly, as though it were storing sunlight inside its pale roots, offering itself to those wise enough to wait and consider how this root, shaped by patience and strengthened by cold, represented a kind of quiet wisdom now nearly forgotten, reminding us that some of the most powerful foods on earth are those that grow in their own time, defying the clocks and calculations of a world too hurried to remember the taste of patience. And now, weary traveller of moonlit meadows, may the gentle hush of Nightfall Hollow settle softly around your drifting thoughts, as we continue our quiet journey through the forgotten gardens of old, arriving at a humble yet noble plant that once filled the baskets of medieval villagers and earned a place of honour in their kitchens and apothecaries, a sturdy green known as Good King Henry, whose name alone carried a reassuring warmth, as though the plant itself were a kindly monarch standing watch over the common folk, offering nourishment, strength, and resilience, in an age where every meal was a blessing, and every leaf had a purpose. If you allow yourself to imagine the slow rhythm of those ancient days, you might see how good King Henry grew beside stone cottages with walls softened by creeping moss, its thick, arrow-shaped leaves catching droplets of morning dew like tiny crystal mirrors, each one shining faintly in the dawnlight, and the villagers who understood the earth through instinct rather than instruction recognized its remarkable value immediately. For this plant was richer in iron than spinach, fuller in vitamin C than many fruits, and capable of feeding a family in more ways than one. Its tender young shoots tasting so much like asparagus that the poorest households could enjoy a dish fit for nobility without ever setting foot inside a castle. But beyond its culinary charm, good King Henry possessed a quiet medicinal power that made it almost sacred in the eyes of medieval healers, for its leaves and herbs were used to soothe wounds, ease swelling, and calm the body after long days of toil. And though the people of that era could not name the anti-inflammatory compounds we recognize today, they felt their effects in the easing of pain, the mending of injuries, and the gentle support of the immune system, creating a bond of trust between plant and people that lasted for generations, until the winds of industrialization swept through the fields and changed the world forever. For modern agriculture, ever hungry for speed and uniformity, had no patience for a plant like good King Henry, which grew slowly, steadily, and thoughtfully, refusing to be rushed or manipulated. And worst of all, from the perspective of seed merchants, it was a perennial, meaning that once planted it returned year after year without needing new seeds, new fertilizers, or new investments. A self-sufficient guardian that fed families without feeding corporate profit. And so, quietly and without ceremony, it was pushed aside, labeled outdated, inconvenient, or simply forgotten, even though its value remained as true as the turning of the seasons. And so, as your eyes grow heavy and the soft glow of imagination drifts like candle smoke through your thoughts, picture good King Henry growing in the corner of a medieval garden, tall and steadfast, its leaves stirring in the evening breeze like the cloak of a kindly king, offering nourishment to tired bodies and solace to troubled hearts, a reminder that strength often comes in modest forms, and that some of the greatest gifts ever given to humankind came not from laboratories or factories, but from quiet plants rooted deeply in the wisdom of the earth, waiting patiently for us to remember them. And now, gentle pilgrim of the drifting night, may the soft breath of the ancient forest brush lightly against your thoughts, as we step deeper into the forgotten fields of old, where among climbing vines and tangled undergrowth, there lived a plant so quietly extraordinary that those who cultivated it considered it nothing less than a gift from the earth's oldest wisdom, a humble treasure known as the groundnut, whose knotted tubers and winding stems once sustained entire communities with a strength that modern crops, streamlined and standardized, can scarcely imitate. For this plant was nature's own multivitamin long before the word existed, carrying within its earthy flesh 3 times the protein of potatoes, and enough iron to fortify bodies worn down by cold seasons and endless labor. If you let your mind drift toward the soft glow of firelit huts and woven baskets filled with the day's harvest, you might see how the groundnut vine curled its way through the edges of wild forests and riverbanks, reaching upward with quiet determination, its roots diving deep into the soil like explorers searching for hidden strength. And the people of that time, especially the native communities who tended it long before medieval farmers knew its name, understood that this plant was a steadfast companion, thriving where others failed, flourishing in soils that would have sent more delicate crops into despair, surviving droughts, storms, and poor conditions with a stoic calm that mirrored the resilience of those who depended on it. What made groundnut so precious, beyond its remarkable nourishment, was its ability to thrive without coaxing, manipulation, or chemical intervention. For while modern crops often require fertilizers, irrigation systems, and constant attention, Groundnut grew as if guided by an inner knowledge of the land, drawing nutrients where none seemed to exist, and leaving the soil healthier than before, a generous act rarely found in today's industrial fields. And this very independence, this refusal to conform to the rigid patterns required by large-scale farming, is what ultimately led to its quiet removal from the stage of modern agriculture. For in an age where fields are designed for machines rather than hands, a plant that grows as it pleases, creeping over supports, climbing where it wishes, producing tubers scattered unpredictably through the soil, becomes a nuisance to industrial logic. And farming companies saw no profit in a crop that resisted automation and demanded patience, skill, and a human touch. And so the groundnut, once a reliable foundation of entire food systems, was overshadowed by more compliant vegetables that could be harvested in massive identical waves, stacked into crates, and shipped across continents with machine-like precision. And yet, as you ease further into rest, perhaps you can picture groundnut still thriving in the quiet corners of forgotten forests, its vines winding softly around mossy branches, its tubers resting in cool earth like hidden pearls, its resilience unfaded by centuries of neglect, whispering gently to anyone who cares to listen that true strength does not always announce itself loudly, but often grows in silence, waiting patiently through the turning seasons, offering nourishment more ancient and complete than any engineered crop could ever hope to replicate. And now, quiet traveller wandering deeper into the soft twilight of ancient fields, may the gentle murmur of wind across old stone walls soothe your thoughts as we come upon another forgotten marvel of the medieval garden, a humble yet spirited green known as sorrel, whose bright, lemony sharpness once awakened weary palates during the coldest months of the year. For this plant, with its tender arrow-shaped leaves and unmistakable tang, was so beloved by cooks and healers alike that it became a constant companion through long winters when other vegetables surrendered to frost, and medieval folk admired it both for its flavour and for its remarkable resilience. For while many crops bowed before the icy breath of December, sorrel remained alive and vibrant, as if warmed from within by a secret spark of sunlight. If you let your imagination drift slowly across the snow-dusted fields of the past, you might see sorrel clustered around the edges of wooden fences, or growing boldly in the shadow of thatched cottages, its leaves bright even under grey skies, and villagers, with hands numbed by the cold, plucked it gratefully, adding it to broths, porridges, and early spring stews, not only for its invigorating taste but for its astonishing wealth of nutrients. For sorrel contains more vitamin A than many vegetables considered superior today, and medieval healers valued it for its ability to revive tired bodies, sharpen sluggish appetites, and bring a touch of freshness to meals otherwise heavy with preserved foods and salted meats. What made sorrel truly remarkable, however, was not merely its flavour or nutritional strength, but its natural, almost uncanny durability, for it thrived in conditions that would have broken most modern crops, shrugging off frost, drought, and harsh winds, as though guided by a quiet defiance, and its leaves remained crisp and vibrant even when the earth hardened beneath the weight of winter, which made it invaluable in a world without greenhouses, trucks, or artificial lights, and medieval families relied on it much as they relied on firewood or stored grain, trusting that sorrel would appear faithfully when they needed it most. Yet despite its virtues, sorrel was quietly pushed aside in the age of industrial agriculture, not because it failed to nourish or grow, but because it grew too well, too freely, too unpredictably for the rigid schedules of large-scale farming, and even more inconveniently for the modern system. It wilted faster than many commercial greens, meaning it could not sit for weeks in refrigerated trucks or look polished and perfect beneath fluorescent lights, and so marketers declared it inconvenient, grocers ignored it, and people gradually forgot that this tough, tangy plant had once been a winter saviour for their ancestors. And now, as your body softens into the deep comfort of the night, imagine sorrel glowing gently under a pale winter moon, its leaves carrying that bright, playful flavor that once surprised countless medieval taste buds. Each bite delivering a reminder that even in the coldest seasons life endures, flavor survives, and nature continues to offer gifts that ask for nothing but simple recognition. And perhaps let this plant story whisper something to your resting thoughts, that resilience does not always look loud or dramatic, but sometimes grows quietly, persistently, and beautifully at the edge of forgotten gardens, waiting for us to remember its worth. And now, gentle wanderer drifting deeper into the quiet hush of starlit farmlands, may the soft glow of distant candlelight settle warmly across your thoughts, as we approach one of the grandest plants ever to grace a medieval garden, a towering marvel known as cardoon, whose broad silvery leaves and thick-ribbed stalks rose from the earth like the outstretched arms of some ancient guardian, and whose reputation for strength, healing, and nourishment made it both a farmer's treasure and a healer's pride. For in those distant centuries, when medical knowledge was shaped by experience and observation, rather than laboratories and charts, cardoon stood as a symbol of natural power so profound that entire communities trusted it to protect their hearts, cleanse their blood, and keep their bodies strong through long seasons of toil. If you allow your mind to loosen gently into the dim glow of imagination, you might see cardoon stretching nearly 6 feet into the sky beside stone walls and wooden fences, its arching foliage rustling like parchment in the wind, each leaf shimmering with a pale green tint that caught the sun in a way that made it look almost enchanted. And medieval farmers, who often called it the great thistle of life, harvested its thick stems with care, blanching them in cool earthen trenches before cooking them into rich, savoury dishes that tasted faintly of artichoke, yet carried a subtle earthiness all their own, a flavour so prized that it appeared often on the tables of nobles and peasants alike, uniting the classes through simple, honest nourishment. But beyond the kitchen, cardoon revealed a hidden strength that earned it a revered place in medieval medicine, for its compounds, especially those that modern scholars now identify as powerful cholesterol-lowering agents, worked quietly within the body, sweeping through the bloodstream like tiny caretakers, cleansing and supporting the heart with a gentleness that seemed almost magical in an age when most ailments were met with uncertainty. And though medieval healers lacked the vocabulary we use today, they saw the results clearly enough to trust cardoon as a dependable ally, a natural remedy that brought comfort to aching bodies and longevity to those who consumed it regularly. And yet, despite its greatness, cardoon fell out of favour in the age of industrial farming, not because it ceased to nourish or heal, but because it demanded something the modern world struggles to offer: attention, patience, and skill. For unlike the uniform, machine-friendly crops that dominate today's fields, cardoon required careful blanching, thoughtful harvesting, and knowledgeable hands that understood the plant's rhythms. And its sheer size, irregular shape, and delicate preparation made it impractical for assembly line agriculture, which prefers vegetables that fit neatly into boxes, store easily, and conform to the rigid expectations of mass production. So gradually, without fanfare or farewell, cardoon retreated from common gardens into the shadows of culinary history, its once celebrated stalks replaced by crops that valued convenience over richness, uniformity over nutrition, speed over wisdom. And as you sink deeper into rest, perhaps you can imagine this gentle giant still standing tall in some forgotten medieval patch of earth, its wide leaves shimmering under moonlight, its roots anchored firmly in the soil, waiting with quiet dignity for the day when someone will rediscover its strength, its flavour, and the ancient truth it represents, that some of nature's greatest healers grow not for profit or recognition, but simply because the world once needed them, and may yet need them again. And now, gentle dreamer wandering ever deeper into the quiet twilight of forgotten fields, may the soft breeze of Moonwake Hollow drift across your thoughts as we come upon a plant so tender, so charming, and so deeply woven into the folklore of medieval Europe, that it slipped even into fairy tales, a delicate green known as rampion, whose mild sweetness and gentle leaves once ruled the humble salad bowls of countless cottages, and whose presence in window gardens and kitchen plots was so common that medieval folk often spoke of it the way one might speak of an old friend, familiar, dependable, and quietly nourishing. If you allow your mind to wander down the narrow footpaths of that distant age, you might see rampion growing in neat clusters beside wells, stone fences, and wooden doorsteps, its soft green leaves shimmering in the morning light like the wings of tiny forest sprites. And when the villagers plucked them carefully, lovingly, they knew they held in their hands a plant rich in magnesium, gentle in flavor, and remarkably soothing to the body, making it a cherished companion during seasons when heavy breads, salted meats, and root vegetables dominated the table, for rampion brought a refreshing lightness and vitality that balanced the medieval diet with a grace few modern greens can match. Its flavor, subtle and mild like the faintest whisper of radish, made rampion beloved by both young and old, and cooks of that era often added it to soups, stews, and fresh salads, trusting not only its taste but its fortifying properties. For while they did not know the exact minerals or scientific terms, they felt its effects in stronger bones, calmer nerves, and the quiet comfort that came from eating something that seemed to carry a breath of spring inside every leaf. And so rampion became a staple of daily life, found in nearly every garden from the smallest cottage to the grand estates of minor nobility. But perhaps the most charming part of rampion's story is how deeply it became intertwined with legend, appearing in old tales as a plant desired so desperately that it could inspire bargains, quests, and even the weaving of destiny itself. Stories that modern readers might recognize without ever knowing that rampion was at their heart, for its value in the medieval psyche was so strong that it symbolized nourishment, longing, and the mysterious bond between people and the living earth, a bond far older and deeper than the commercial relationships that define our modern food. And yet, in the march toward industrial agriculture, rampion was left behind not for lack of flavor or nourishment, but because it refused to obey the demands of high-speed farming, growing slowly, unevenly, and with a delicate structure that resisted packing, shipping, and long storage, qualities that once made it endearing, but now made it inconvenient, and so it quietly faded from fields and markets, replaced by blander, sturdier vegetables that thrived under artificial lights and chemical coaxing, leaving behind only a faint echo in old recipes and forgotten stories. And now, as your body settles deeper into the gentle pull of sleep, imagine rampion still thriving in some quiet medieval garden, its leaves trembling in the night breeze like the soft breath of a story waiting to be told, offering nourishment that is simple yet profound, reminding us in its quiet way that not all treasures are bold or powerful. Some are soft, subtle, and require a gentle hand to appreciate. And perhaps in remembering rampion, we also remember a part of ourselves that once lived closer to the earth, guided by its rhythms rather than the hurried ticking of clocks. And now, gentle wanderer of the dim and peaceful hours, may the soft hush of ancient castle halls settle around your drifting thoughts as we approach another remarkable treasure from the old world, a plant known as Alexander's, whose tall golden stems and glossy dark leaves once dominated the gardens of Roman soldiers, medieval monks, and humble villagers alike, for this herb, both powerful and versatile, was treasured not merely as food, but as a complete survival companion, a plant so dependable that entire empires carried it across continents, trusting its roots, stems, leaves, and seeds to nourish, heal, and sustain them in ways few plants today could ever hope to match. If you let your mind wander gently along the cobblestone roads of forgotten centuries, you might see Alexanders growing in great clusters along the edges of monasteries or near the fortified walls of bustling Roman towns, its bright yellow umbels swaying gently over the paths like little lanterns of sunlight. And the people of that time, farmers, physicians, and scholars, knew its value intimately, for not a single part of Alexander's was wasted. The stems, cooked like celery, but richer and more peppery. The leaves added to stews for warmth and depth, the roots eaten like parsnips, and the seeds treasured for their medicinal potency, offering relief to troubled stomachs and aching joints with a reliability that made this plant indispensable in an age when healing came directly from the fields rather than from bottles or laboratories. Its most mysterious virtue, however, lay in the compound we now identify as astragalin, a natural healer woven deep within the plant's fibers, which medieval herbalists recognized through observation and intuition rather than scientific language. And though they could not name the molecules that brought relief, they understood with absolute certainty that Alexander's strengthened the body, soothed inflammation, and supported recovery in a way that felt almost enchanted, as if the plant carried within it a wisdom older than the civilizations that cultivated it. For centuries, Alexander's thrived across Europe and beyond, growing vigorously in coastal winds and rocky soils where other greens failed, and its robust nature made it a trustworthy ally for travelers, sailors, and soldiers who needed nourishment that would not falter under harsh conditions. For Alexander's, unlike many modern crops, required no delicate care, no fertilizers, no coaxing. It grew where it wished, when it wished, as strong and steady as the people who depended on it. But when the age of industrial agriculture arrived, bringing with it machines, monocultures, and an appetite for uniformity, Alexander's found itself out of place, for it grew too independently, too vigorously, too unpredictably, for fields mapped out in precise rows, and its peppery flavor, once cherished by medieval cooks, was deemed inconvenient by modern markets seeking mildness and sameness. And so, despite its extraordinary usefulness, the plant was quietly replaced by the tame and easily standardized celery, a timid descendant that lacked the richness, vitality, and medicinal spirit of its ancient predecessor. And now, as the soft weight of sleep gathers around you like a velvet cloak, imagine Alexander's rising tall in the golden light of a medieval afternoon, its leaves trembling gently, as if whispering forgotten secrets to the wind, reminding us that strength, resilience, and healing once grew freely in the spaces between stone walls and forest paths, long before the world traded complexity for convenience. And perhaps, in listening to Alexander's story, you feel a faint echo of the old truth it carries, that the greatest gifts of the earth often require nothing more than respect, patience, and a willingness to remember what was once known. And now, gentle sojourner drifting through the velvety hush of starlit gardens, may the quiet breath of night-bloom veil wrap softly around your thoughts as we approach one of the most enchanting plants ever cherished by medieval folk, a herb so beloved for its uplifting power that old healers called it the herb of gladness, a name whispered with warmth and gratitude across countless generations, for this remarkable plant known as borage carried within its star-shaped blue flowers a strange and comforting magic, a natural lift of the spirit that soothed weary hearts and revived troubled minds long before the world understood the chemistry behind such emotional balm. If you allow your imagination to drift gently through those distant centuries, you might see borage growing in cheerful abundance beside stone wells, monastery walls, and cottage doors, its vivid sapphire blossoms shimmering like drops of sky fallen gently onto the earth. And medieval cooks, charmed by its beauty and taste, sprinkled its flowers atop salads and feasts, not merely for decoration but because the blossoms carried a mild cucumber-like sweetness touched with a hint of honey, a flavor so delicate that guests often paused mid-meal just to admire the simple wonder of it, as if savoring both taste and memory in a single bite. But perhaps the true magic of borage lay not only in its flavor or its striking appearance, but in the mysterious effect it had upon the human spirit, an effect medieval herbalists recognized instinctively, for they believed borage could chase away melancholy, steady the nerves, and fill one's courage like a cup filled slowly at dawn. And modern science, centuries later, would discover that the plant contains remarkable levels of gamma-linolenic acid, GLA, a compound known for supporting healthy inflammation response and emotional balance, confirming the quiet wisdom of those who tended these glowing blue flowers with reverence and care. Borage was more than a plant. It was a companion, a gentle healer that brightened the heaviness of winter and softened the weight of hardship. And bees adored it just as much as people did, humming joyfully around its starry petals, as though drawn to a secret source of sweetness known only to the oldest creatures of the world. And in gardens where borage thrived, there was always a sense of liveliness, a soft stirring of hope that even the most weathered farmer could feel when passing by its vibrant clusters. Yet despite its virtues, borage eventually found itself overshadowed in the rise of industrial agriculture, for its delicate blossoms did not travel well. Its seasonal rhythms resisted strict scheduling, and its wild abundance made it difficult to profit from in a world that prefers plants dependent on controlled cycles and constant repurchasing. And though some regions even restricted its cultivation because of minor alkaloids misunderstood or misrepresented, medieval people knew that everything, herbs, humans, and life itself, requires balance rather than fear, and so they continued to trust borage as a source of gentle strength long after official voices proclaimed their doubts. And now, as your eyelids grow heavier and the air around you settles into deeper stillness, imagine borage glowing under a quiet medieval moon, its star-shaped flowers trembling softly in the night breeze like tiny lanterns guiding weary souls home, and let its story whisper to you a truth. The old world understood deeply that sometimes the earth offers not only nourishment for the body, but tenderness for the spirit, and in remembering such gifts, we remember also the gentler parts of ourselves, those that still long for beauty, courage, and the simple joy of being alive. And now, gentle wanderer drifting through the deepening quiet of the night, may the soft breath of meadow hush plain settle around your thoughts as we step toward one of the most comforting and quietly miraculous plants of the medieval world, a plant whose gentle nature and healing touch made it indispensable in every humble cottage kitchen and herbalist's chamber, a plant known as mallow, whose velvety leaves and tender roots held within them a soothing power so cherished that entire families depended on it during times of illness, hunger, and hardship. For mallow was not merely food nor merely medicine. It was a soft, steady companion woven into the very rhythm of everyday life. If you let your imagination drift along the dirt paths of those ancient days, you might see mallow growing beside fences, under windowsills, and along the edges of fields, its round, soft leaves swaying gently in the breeze, as if whispering reassurance to anyone who passed by, and the villagers, who recognized its value through centuries of trial and trust, gathered its leaves to thicken soups during lean winters, cooked them into healing broths for the weak, and used its roots to create soothing remedies that eased sore throats, calmed inflamed bellies, and softened irritated skin, with a tenderness that felt almost magical in its simplicity. The secret of mallow lay in its natural mucilage, a silky, protective substance that medieval healers did not name but understood deeply, for when mixed into warm water or food, this gentle compound coated the throat, stomach, and skin like a comforting embrace, bringing relief where pain once lingered. And because of this remarkable quality, mallow became the original ingredient behind an early form of marshmallow, not the sugary confection we know today, but a soft, soothing paste made from mallow root that was given to soothe children's coughs, ease fevers, and offer comfort during long winter nights when illness crept through cold stone walls. But perhaps the most fascinating trait of mallow was its resilience, for it grew so easily and so abundantly that medieval families relied on it as both emergency food and dependable medicine, especially in harsh years when crops failed or storms destroyed precious harvests. And its ability to thrive in poor soil made it a symbol of quiet endurance, a plant that seemed to say in its own gentle way that hope does not always grow in perfect conditions. Sometimes it flourishes in the roughest corners of the earth, offering strength to those who need it most. Yet in the age of industrial farming, mallow was quietly dismissed, labelled an invasive weed because it grew too well, spread too freely, and asked too little from the soil, qualities that once made it invaluable, but now made it incompatible with a system built on control, uniformity, and profit. And so the humble plant that once saved lives, eased suffering, and filled countless bowls of soup faded from the mainstream world, even though its gentle medicine and nourishing leaves remain just as powerful as they were in the days when medieval families whispered thanks over steaming pots. And now, as the night wraps itself more closely around you, and your breath grows soft and slow, imagine mallow glowing under a muted moon, its leaves trembling like small green lanterns in the breeze, offering the same quiet comfort it offered to tired villagers centuries ago. And let its memory remind your drifting thoughts that healing can be gentle, nourishment can be humble, and some of the most powerful gifts of the natural world are those that appear small, soft, and easily overlooked. And now, gentle pilgrim drifting deeper into the tranquil hush of the night, may the cool breath of tidal shore wrap softly around your wandering thoughts, as we journey toward one of the most resilient and quietly magnificent plants ever cherished by coastal communities of the Old World, a hardy survivor known as Sea Kale, whose silvery green leaves and sturdy stems rose defiantly from rocky coastlines that most crops would never dare to claim. For this remarkable plant thrived not in gentle farmland or sheltered valleys, but in the harsh embrace of salt-laden winds, crashing waves, and bitter winter storms. And it was precisely this resilience that made medieval folk revere Sea Kale as both a guardian of the coastline and a dependable source of nourishment when other crops surrendered to the elements. If you allow your imagination to drift toward those rugged shores of centuries past, you might see Sea Kale growing boldly in clusters along cliffs and beaches, its thick leaves coated in a faint waxy sheen that protected it from the punishing salt spray. And when coastal villagers harvested it in early spring, long before other vegetables dared to awaken, they found within its crisp, pale stems a burst of flavor both earthy and faintly oceanic, a taste that seemed to bridge the worlds of land and sea. And though they did not speak in terms of vitamins or science, they knew instinctively that Sea Kale fortified their bodies, strengthened their spirits, and offered a rare kind of freshness during the bleakest months. Modern knowledge would later confirm what those villagers sensed, that Sea Kale carried generous amounts of vitamin C, enough to keep sailors from the clutches of scurvy, and held within its roots and leaves a wealth of minerals including iodine that supported the thyroid and helped the body endure cold coastal winters. And because it grew in places where nearly nothing else survived, it became a symbol of steadfastness, a plant that defied adversity and taught resilience simply through the way it lived. But perhaps the most extraordinary gift of Sea Kale was its ability not only to thrive in harsh conditions, but to improve the land it grew upon, for its sturdy roots held rocky soils together, preventing erosion and protecting fragile coastlines from the relentless pull of the sea, and its presence created small sanctuaries for other plant life, forming pockets of stability in landscapes shaped by wind and salt. And in this way, Sea Kale acted as both provider and protector, feeding the people while guarding the very ground beneath their feet. Yet, when the age of industrial farming dawned, bringing with it a preference for crops that grew quickly, uniformly, and far from the unpredictable rhythms of the sea, Sea Kale quietly faded from the fields, not because it lacked value, but because it insisted on its own terms, thriving only in the environments nature intended for it, refusing the tidy rows and regimented patterns of mass agriculture. And though gourmet chefs and foragers would eventually rediscover its charms, the plant never regained the widespread appreciation it once held among medieval villagers, who understood the sea, the wind, and the land far more intimately than we do today. And now, as your breath slows and the gentle tide of sleep rises within you, Imagine sea kale glistening under a misty moonlit sky, its leaves rustling softly in the salt-heavy breeze, like the whispered lullaby of the ocean itself, reminding your drifting thoughts that true strength often comes from the harshest places, and that sometimes the most nourishing gifts of the world are born, not in comfort, but in the relentless dance between storm and shore. And now, gentle dream roamer drifting through the deep velvet hush of midnight fields, may the faint whisper of wind whistle glade soothe your thoughts as we come upon one of the most curious and enchanting treasures ever tended in medieval gardens, a whimsical little marvel known as the asparagus pea, whose brilliant red flowers and delicate winged pods caught the eye of every passer-by, glowing like crimson lanterns against the green tapestry of the kitchen plots. For this plant, though small in stature, held within its odd, ribbed pods a flavour so reminiscent of asparagus that cooks across the centuries delighted in its playful deception, marvelling at how something that looked like a pea could taste like a noble spear of springtime. If you allow your imagination to wander gently into those long-ago garden paths, you might see the asparagus pea weaving gracefully through woven trellises and low wooden borders, its tender vines curling like gentle strokes of a painter's brush, and medieval gardeners, charmed by both its resilience and its beauty, prized it not only for its culinary novelty, but for its reliability. For the plant grew quickly, produced abundantly, and required little more than sunlight and soil to flourish, making it a faithful companion in small cottage gardens where space was precious and nourishment had to be both efficient and delightful. The true wonder of the asparagus pea, however, lay not merely in its taste or appearance, but in the quiet work it performed beneath the soil, for this humble legume fixed nitrogen naturally, restoring fertility to tired earth without any help from manure, powders, or potions, a gift that medieval farmers recognized instinctively even if they lacked the scientific vocabulary to explain it. And in this way the plant offered more than food. It offered renewal, giving back to the land what harvests had taken, an act of generosity that modern industrial agriculture, obsessed with chemicals and control, often forgets to honor. Yet for all its charm and usefulness, the asparagus pea fell victim to the demands of modern markets, which prized uniformity over uniqueness and durability over delicacy. For the winged pods, though delicious, were fragile, irregularly shaped, and unsuited for the rigid boxes and shipping crates that carry vegetables across continents, and their peak flavor came in brief windows of perfect ripeness, making them too fleeting for the slow machinery of distribution, and too unpredictable for corporations seeking vegetables that obey schedules rather than seasons. So the asparagus pea, once a jewel brightening medieval table gardens, faded quietly into obscurity, known today mostly by heirloom enthusiasts and wandering chefs, while the old world remembered it as a plant that brought color to the eye, surprise to the tongue, and nourishment to the soil, a trifecta of gifts rarely found in even the most engineered modern vegetables, and its disappearance serves as a soft reminder of how easily beauty and usefulness can be overshadowed when convenience becomes the ruler of the fields. And now, as your breath grows steadier, and the gentle warmth of sleep settles upon you like a woolen cloak, imagine the asparagus pea glowing beneath a soft medieval sunrise, its scarlet blossoms shimmering with dew, its pods fluttering like tiny wings in the breeze, and let its story remind your drifting mind that some of the world's most delightful treasures are small, fleeting, and delicate, and that their magic lies precisely in the fact that they are not meant to be controlled, but simply cherished. And now, gentle traveller drifting toward the soft edge of dreams, may the muted breath of Thistledown Hollow fold tenderly around your thoughts as we come to the final treasure of our long-forgotten garden, a plant so modest in appearance, and yet so astonishing in its gifts, that medieval folk spoke of it with a kind of quiet reverence, a humble green known as chickweed, whose delicate star-shaped blossoms and tender leaves carpeted the earth like a soft emerald quilt, offering nourishment, healing, and resilience in a form so unassuming that the modern world nearly erased its memory, even though it once fed entire families and soothed countless ailments without ever asking for anything in return. If you let your imagination drift back to those old country paths, you might picture chickweed spreading joyfully along the edges of stone walls, beneath the eaves of cottages, and in the shaded corners of gardens where sunlight trickled gently through the branches, and medieval foragers, who knew the land with an intimacy we can barely imagine today, gathered it by the handful, adding its mild, slightly sweet leaves to salads, soups, and travelling provisions, for chickweed offered a crisp, refreshing taste that reminded weary villagers of springtime even in the heart of winter. And although they could not name the vitamins packed within it, they felt its effects in their bones and breath, its gentle nourishment flowing through them like a quiet blessing. But chickweed was far more than a simple food, for its soft green leaves contained saponins and natural anti-inflammatory compounds that medieval healers used to treat wounds, rashes, fevers, and even eye irritations. And though they lacked microscopes or modern terminology, they understood perfectly well that chickweed brought relief where other herbs faltered, creating soothing poultices and warm infusions that calmed the body like a whispered lullaby. And this plant, spreading freely even in poor soil and harsh weather, became a dependable ally for families who needed medicine as accessible as the air they breathed. The remarkable resilience of chickweed made it invaluable in an age without chemical fertilizers or controlled irrigation, for the plant thrived almost anywhere: dry fields, shaded corners, abandoned plots, growing faster than hunger and returning faithfully after every harvest. And this natural abundance, so generous in its simplicity, became its downfall in the age of industrial agriculture, which looks with suspicion upon any plant that grows freely, spreads without permission, and refuses to serve profit-driven models. And so chickweed, once a treasured staple of medieval diets and medicine cabinets, was recast as a weed, something to be pulled, poisoned, or paved over, even though its nutritional strength far exceeds that of many vegetables engineered for modern shelves. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy, and the gentle pull of sleep cradles your thoughts, imagine chickweed shimmering softly under the silver glow of a medieval moon, its tiny white blossoms opening like delicate stars against the night, its leaves offering quiet nourishment to anyone wise enough to kneel and gather them. And let its story remind you that the earth often gives its greatest gifts in humble forms, growing at our feet, thriving in forgotten corners, waiting patiently for us to remember that true nourishment of body, spirit, and soil cannot always be bought or controlled, but sometimes grows wild and free like a soft green whisper from the ancient world. And now, gentle dream walker wandering ever deeper into the twilight of ancient memory, may the quiet hum of hearth-woven hollow settle softly around your drifting thoughts, as we step beyond the simple catalogue of forgotten vegetables and into the living world that once nurtured them, a world where gardens were not merely places of food and toil but sanctuaries of wisdom, tradition, and whispered secrets, where each plant, no matter how small, held a story, a purpose, and a place in the great tapestry of medieval life, and where the 15 plants we have explored were only the beginning of a much larger truth, a truth that concerns the mysterious disappearance of these crops and the quiet forces that erased them from our common tables. For in those long ago centuries, gardens were tended not by corporations or machines, but by women whose hands knew the soil as intimately as one knows the lines of a beloved face, by monks who wrote their observations in silent cloisters, by shepherds who gathered herbs as they walked, and by wise old men who remembered the secrets of seed and season passed down through generations. And these keepers of the earth understood their plants deeply, how they healed, how they nourished, how they resisted frost or drought or sickness, how they protected the land, and this quiet, ancient knowledge formed a network of understanding that stitched together villages, monasteries, forests and farms into a living, breathing system of cooperation between humans and nature. It was said in some valleys that each plant had a soul, not in the literal sense, but in the way it responded to care, weather, company, and intention. And medieval gardeners believed that vegetables such as lovage or sorrel thrived best when spoken to gently at dawn, while cardoon grew tallest beside walls that absorbed and reflected the sun's warmth, and groundnut produced the sweetest tubers when planted after a summer storm. And though such beliefs today might sound like superstition, modern science quietly confirms that plants do respond to sound, temperature, wind patterns, microclimates, and even gentle touch, revealing that the old gardeners were not merely guessing, they were listening. But with the slow march of time came powerful changes. Lands consolidated under wealthy lords, monasteries dissolved, forests cleared for fields, and trade networks expanded into a roaring, bustling machine. And as cities grew, and the desire for uniformity, predictability, and rapid harvests overtook the old rhythms of patient gardening, the gentle vegetables that once defined the medieval palate began to vanish, not all at once, but slowly, like stars fading at the approach of dawn, each replaced by crops that were easier to ship, faster to grow, and more profitable to sell, until only scattered pockets of knowledge remained in small rural corners, or in the quiet pages of forgotten manuscripts. There were whispers among scholars that certain guilds, powerful organizations controlling grain, spice, and seed trade routes, actively discouraged the growth of perennial plants like Good King Henry or Lovage. For these plants, which returned year after year without needing to be replanted, threatened the growing economy of seed sales. And though history rarely records such subtle forms of influence, the evidence lies hidden in patterns. Plants with high nutritional power and low dependency quietly vanished, while those requiring constant repurchasing flourished, revealing a shadowed story of profit woven through the soil itself. And as these forgotten vegetables faded from the common gardens, so too faded the knowledge of how to use them, recipes lost, remedies unwritten, flavors untasted by modern tongues, and with each passing generation, the world drifted further from the deep, earthy wisdom that once anchored rural life, until today, when the bright lights of supermarkets disguise the absence of these ancient companions, and most people do not even know what has been lost, let alone why those losses matter. Yet even now, if one wanders into the wild hedgerows, abandoned fields, or crumbling stone walls of old estates, one might still find a survivor, a stubborn patch of sorrel gleaming like the memory of spring, a wild tangle of chickweed offering gentle nourishment to anyone willing to stoop and gather it, or perhaps a lone lovage plant, standing tall and fragrant as though guarding some secret of the past. And in these small green echoes the medieval world still speaks, reminding us that the earth forgets nothing, even when we do. And so, as you breathe softly in the stillness of your own quiet night, imagine the lost gardens of the medieval world spreading out around you like a vast dreamscape of silver moonlight and rustling leaves, each plant a fragment of ancient knowledge waiting patiently beneath centuries of silence. And know that our journey through these forgotten vegetables is far from finished, for there are deeper layers yet, hidden histories, secret guilds, herbal traditions, and strange customs tied to these crops that even now whisper from the past, asking to be remembered. And now, gentle seeker drifting deeper into the velvet folds of the night, may the faint glow of lantern more keep, guide your wandering thoughts as we move beyond the quiet gardens, and into the hidden chambers of power where decisions about crops, seeds, and land were made. For the story of these 15 forgotten vegetables does not end at the edges of humble fields or monastery gardens, but continues into the halls of wealthy merchants, shadow guilds, and crown-appointed stewards who, in the weaving centuries of the late medieval world, realized that the control of food was the quiet control of everything. And thus began a slow, silent war for the dominion of seeds, a war that would eventually bury these ancient crops beneath layers of secrecy, convenience, and profit. If you let your imagination drift into those dimly lit chambers, you might see long tables draped with scrolls and sealed letters, merchants whispering in low voices about supply routes and crop yields, lords calculating taxes on land and harvests, clerics discussing the moral weight of abundance and famine, and at the center of these discussions, though rarely mentioned aloud, were seeds, simple, unassuming seeds that held within them the power to feed or starve, to enrich or impoverish, to stabilize an empire or bring it trembling to its knees. And those who understood this truth moved carefully, quietly, shaping the world with decisions that appeared small yet rippled across generations like unseen tides. The perennial crops, Lovage, Good King Henry, Groundnut, and others, posed a subtle threat to those who profited from the yearly rhythm of purchase, planting, failure, and replacement. For these plants, which returned faithfully every season, with no need for new seeds or merchants, represented self-sufficiency, independence, and a kind of rural freedom that powerful guilds found deeply inconvenient. And so, slowly they encouraged farmers to convert their fields to annual crops that demanded constant attention, new seeds and more predictable cycles, offering incentives, easier trade access, or preferential taxes to those who complied, while those who clung to the old ways found themselves quietly pressured, sometimes even punished, until the ancient vegetables retreated into small corners and family gardens, where they survived only in whispers. And then there were the superstitions, strange beliefs woven into the social fabric of medieval life, some seeded intentionally by merchant factions eager to eliminate competition, others born organically from fear and myth. For it was said in low murmurs that certain plants, such as borage or rampion, carried restless spirits, making soil fickle and unpredictable, or that good King Henry drew too much strength from the earth, and thus drained the blessings meant for other crops. And while the wise healers and herbalists dismissed such claims, the common folk, living in a fragile world where drought, sickness, and famine loomed constantly, were easily swayed by suggestion, and soon many of these old vegetables became objects of suspicion rather than gratitude. The church, too, played an unintended role, for monasteries once served as great repositories of botanical knowledge, tending medicinal gardens with care and devotion, recording properties and uses in illuminated manuscripts. But when political tides shifted and certain monasteries dissolved or were repurposed, their gardens were ploughed under, their texts scattered or lost, and with them vanished centuries of practical knowledge, leaving only fragments of what had once been a vast and intricate understanding of the natural world, an understanding that took root in humility, patience and reverence, but was uprooted by the relentless march of centralization and authority. Meanwhile, the urbanization of the late medieval and early Renaissance periods further eroded the presence of these ancient vegetables, for city dwellers relied increasingly on centralized markets rather than home gardens, and merchants favored crops that stored well, traveled far, and maintained their appearance under harsh conditions, qualities that most of these ancient plants, delicate and rich in living vitality, did not possess. And thus the old vegetables, once the pride of hearth and field, slowly slipped from the collective memory of bustling towns, their absence unnoticed by generations who never tasted the tang of sorrel in midwinter, or the sweetness of skirret roasted beside a fire. But the countryside remembered, and in hidden valleys or along forgotten forest edges, one could still find pockets of resistance. Old women gathering chickweed for remedies, shepherds chewing lovage stems while tending their flocks, monks cultivating rampion behind weathered cloister walls, families passing down seeds of groundnut like heirlooms, wrapped in cloth and story, preserved not out of profit, but because the plants had become part of their bloodline, a living heritage too precious to discard, even when the world outside had turned its back on them. And now, as the soft currents of sleep begin to fold around your senses like a woolen cloak warmed by the hearth, imagine these secret seed keepers moving quietly through the ages, preserving in their hands and hearts the last living fragments of a vanished agricultural world, a world where nourishment was intimate, where medicine grew at one's doorstep, where flavor and vitality mattered more than convenience, and where people understood, deeply and intuitively, that the earth did not simply feed the body but shaped the soul, and in remembering this, we begin to understand why the disappearance of these ancient vegetables was not merely a matter of taste, but a matter of power, silence, and forgotten wisdom. And now, gentle traveller drifting through the soft half-light of ancient memory, may the quiet murmur of Elderstone Cloister wrap gently around your thoughts as we step beyond the politics of guilds and seeds, and enter the far more mysterious realm of those who guarded plant knowledge with vows, rituals, and traditions. For in the shaded corners of medieval Europe there existed groups of herbalists, scribes, and gardeners, who served not kings or merchants but the plants themselves, and these custodians of the old green wisdom understood truths so profound and so delicate that they often passed them down only through whispered instructions at dusk, or through secret symbols carved into wooden handles of old tools, ensuring that even in the face of suppression, the knowledge of which plants healed, which strengthened, which fortified, and which empowered would never fully die. If you let your mind drift into the cloister gardens of those shadowed orders, you might see long rectangular beds, arranged according to principles far older than Christianity itself, aligned with solstices, phases of the moon, or the ancient Celtic wheel of the year, and within those carefully tended plots grew the 15 vegetables we have explored, sorrel glistening like a green tear of spring, lovage rising like a fragrant sentinel, groundnut winding upward with stubborn optimism, and skirret resting beneath the soil like a cluster of pale jewels, and the brothers and sisters who tended them did so with a blend of reverence and discipline, knowing that each root and leaf carried a power not to be taken lightly, for the medieval mind did not separate food from medicine, nor sustenance from spirit, and in this holistic view these plants were more than mere ingredients. They were life itself, distilled through soil and season. It was said that the most skilled herbalists of the Green Cloister could diagnose a person's ailment simply by observing how certain plants behaved around them. For plants, they believed, reacted to imbalances, sorrows, fevers, and hidden pains in ways subtle yet telling. A wilting lovage leaf meant the body lacked warmth or strength. An overly vigorous chickweed patch suggested internal inflammation. A pale sorrel leaf revealed that a person's spirit had been dulled by melancholy, and while modern minds might dismiss such observations, current botanical research quietly suggests that plants do respond to electromagnetic fields, chemical changes, and atmospheric shifts caused by living beings, hinting that the old herbalists may have possessed an intuitive understanding of plant-human symbiosis long before science put words to it. But such knowledge made the herbalists both respected and feared, for in a world where sickness could sweep through villages like a silent storm, those who could heal with roots and leaves wielded a power that both comforted and unsettled the authorities. And as the influence of the seed guilds grew and agricultural standardization tightened its grip, the Green Cloister found itself targeted not through violence or accusation, but through subtle erasure, manuscripts quietly confiscated during tax inspections, gardens absorbed into noble estates, apprentices discouraged or bribed away, and over time the Order's open presence faded, leaving behind only scattered fragments, cryptic notes in herbals, odd plant combinations in forgotten recipes, seeds passed secretly from grandmother to granddaughter tucked into pockets and hems. Yet the herbalists adapted, for their allegiance was not to any king or church, but to the continuity of plant wisdom itself, and so they hid their teachings not in books that could be burned or seized, but in stories, lullabies, and folk customs that survived even when kingdoms fell. The tale of Rampion inspiring the Rapunzel legend, the belief that borage lifted the spirit woven into wedding traditions, the idea that Sea Kale protected shorelines turned into coastal blessings, all of which allowed the essence of these plants to survive even when their names and uses faded from everyday life, carried forward by memory disguised as myth. In some regions, the Green Cloister trained quiet protectors, women often called hedgewives or green mothers, though the terms varied by land, whose knowledge was so wide and so subtle that they could restore failing soil, coax a dying plant back to health, or read the land the way scholars read books. And these women, treated with a mix of awe and suspicion, became the final line of defense for the ancient vegetables, saving their seeds in clay jars, planting them in hidden forest clearings, and ensuring that even as markets shifted and rulers changed, the lineage of these plants remained unbroken, living threads stretching from the medieval world into the hidden corners of the modern one. And now, as your breath deepens and the steady darkness settles more softly around your resting body, imagine these hidden herbalists tending their secret gardens beneath the silver glow of the moon, their hands moving with the confidence of those who speak the language of the earth, whispering lullabies to the plants, passing knowledge through gesture rather than ink. And understand that the survival of these forgotten vegetables was not an accident but a quiet resistance, a gentle, persistent defiance against the forces that sought to erase them, a defiance that still lives today wherever one of these ancient plants takes root in a crack of stone or a corner of forgotten soil, reminding us that wisdom, once planted, never truly dies. And now, gentle traveller, whose thoughts float softly like drifting leaves upon the still waters of midnight fen, may the faint silver glow of the crescent moon guide your inner vision as we step deeper into the hidden practices of the green cloister. For the survival of the ancient vegetables was not merely a matter of skill or secrecy, but depended upon a series of quiet, deeply symbolic rituals performed under specific stars, seasons, and moon phases, rituals that shaped how these plants were sown, nurtured, harvested, and protected from both human ambition and the unpredictable forces of nature. And though modern minds may smile at the idea of planting by moonlight or whispering words to seeds, the medieval herbalists considered these acts essential threads in the delicate tapestry that bound the human body to the living earth. If you let your mind drift into their quiet nighttime world, you might see a small circle of cloaked figures moving barefoot through the dew-laden grass, carrying woven baskets filled with seeds of lovage, skirret, rampion, and sorrel, and each step is taken with deliberate slowness, as though they fear disturbing the slumber of the soil itself. And at the center of their ritual lies a simple yet profound belief that the act of planting is not a task, but a conversation, a silent agreement between human and earth, and that the success of a crop depends not only on sunlight and rain, but on intention, patience, and humility, virtues embodied by those who chose to tend the forgotten vegetables rather than the showier, more profitable crops favored by the merchant guilds. During these moonlit gatherings, seeds were often warmed in the herbalist's hands before being placed into the soil, not because the temperature mattered, but because the green cloister believed that plants responded to the emotional state of the planter, and the slow human touch was thought to awaken the seed's memory, a poetic idea suggesting that each seed carried a faint imprint of the generations that had tended it before, and the herbalists whispered ancestral names or blessings as they worked, weaving invisible threads between past and present, reminding the plants that they belonged to an unbroken lineage stretching back beyond written history. There were other rituals too, stranger still in their mixture of practicality and symbolism. The planting of skirret only on mornings heavy with fog, so that the roots would learn to drink the air, the pruning of lovage in silence, for loud noises were believed to startle the heart of the herb, the gathering of sorrel during the transition between seasons, to ensure its flavor remained sharp and bright, the burying of chickweed roots near water sources, because the herbalists believed it grew best when hearing the whisper of flowing streams, a belief later confirmed by the plant's preference for cool, moist soils, and most curious of all, the protection of the asparagus pea by planting it alongside stones carved with spirals, symbols believed to shield the delicate pods from envy or malice, though the practical explanation may simply be that the stones absorbed heat and protected the plant from sudden shifts in temperature. These rituals, though steeped in spiritual and symbolic meaning, were not empty superstition, for embedded within them were fragments of genuine agricultural wisdom, accumulated across centuries of observation, trial, and careful listening. and the green cloister used ritual as a vessel to preserve knowledge in a world where many could not read, and where ideas transferred through practice and story proved far more enduring than ink on parchment, ensuring that the techniques needed to grow and protect these ancient vegetables survived even when texts were lost or destroyed. In the quiet hours before dawn, once seeds were planted or harvested, the herbalists often lingered in their gardens, sitting cross-legged upon the earth with their palms pressed lightly to the soil, believing that this grounding gesture helped them hear the land's needs, not through sound, but through a kind of intuitive resonance, an internal sense of moisture, temperature, or soil fatigue, the sort of subtle perception that today might be dismissed as fanciful, but which modern gardeners, farmers, and botanists occasionally admit to experiencing when deeply attuned to their work, proving that the line between intuition and skill is often thinner than we think. And now, as your breath softens and your mind drifts gently towards sleep, imagine the green cloister's moonlit gardens shimmering like silver-laced sanctuaries beneath the night sky, each plant standing not as a crop, but as a living memory preserved against time, tended with care, ritual, and devotion by those who believed that the earth was not a resource but a companion. And let these quiet scenes remind you that the medieval world, though wrapped in shadows and superstition, held within it a kind of wisdom modern life has nearly forgotten, the wisdom that growing food is not merely an act of production, but an act of connection, meaning and reverence for the fragile miracle of life itself. And now, gentle wanderer whose thoughts float like drifting embers over the quiet fields of memory, may the soft whisper of Briar Hollow Scriptorium warm your imagination as we move beyond the moonlit rituals of the gardens and into the shadowed rooms where the green cloister stored its rarest treasures, not seeds or tools or tinctures, but manuscripts, scrolls, and bound collections of plant lore written in a script so intricate and symbolic that few outside the order ever learned to read it. For these texts, known collectively as the verdant codices, held centuries of distilled wisdom about the 15 forgotten vegetables and many others like them, wisdom so potent and so complete that the custodians of the cloister guarded it with a devotion bordering on sacred duty, understanding that to misuse such knowledge would be to disrupt the delicate balance between human need and nature's quiet generosity. If you let your mind wander through the dim stone corridors of the green cloister's hidden library, you might picture rows of narrow shelves carved by generations of patient hands, each shelf lined with manuscripts bound in leather softened by age, their spines marked not with words but with symbols, spirals for root vegetables, interlocking rings for herbs, mirrored lines for perennials that returned each spring, and beneath these symbols lay pages filled with writing so flowing and organic that it seemed to mimic the curling tendrils of vines or the branching veins of leaves. And reading these manuscripts required not only literacy, but a trained sensitivity to metaphor, rhythm, and natural imagery, for much of the knowledge was encoded in riddles, parables, or allegories, designed to prevent those of greed or haste from exploiting the teachings without understanding their deeper lessons. Some manuscripts described planting techniques in the form of stories, such as the tale of the 3 sleeping roots, a parable explaining how skirret must be planted in groups of 3 to encourage strength and sweetness, or the legend of the leaf that listens, which, beneath its gentle moral, concealed instructions about Lovage's need for quiet, sheltered corners where the wind did not disturb its tender stalks. And while these tales entertained novices and children, seasoned herbalists learned to decipher the layers hidden beneath the narrative surface, unlocking insights that bordered on scientific precision disguised as poetry. Other texts were more dangerous, for they contained knowledge about plants' medicinal power in such concentrated detail that only the highest-ranking herbalists, those who had completed decades of apprenticeships, were permitted to read them, and to prevent misuse. These codices were written in a hybrid language blending old dialects, botanical sketches, lunar charts, and symbolic diagrams that mapped the relationships between plants, seasons, humors, and the human body, forming a kind of botanical cosmology that allowed the healer to treat illness not by symptom alone but by understanding its deeper source, adjusting diet, herbs and environment in a dance of natural harmony that is rarely practiced today. These secrets, however, also made the verdant codices a target for those who feared or envied the herbalist's knowledge, for nobles who wished to control their subjects, merchants who wanted to dominate the food trade, and even clerics who misunderstood the symbolic language as heresy or paganism, often sought to seize or destroy these manuscripts. And this threat forced the Green Cloister to develop cunning methods of preservation, hiding volumes inside hollowed stones in monastery walls, burying scrolls within clay jars beneath herb beds, or stitching small fragments of knowledge into the hems of travelling cloaks, allowing vital information to pass unnoticed across borders and generations. The most extraordinary secret of all lay in the cloister's use of living manuscripts, a practice nearly forgotten now, wherein the herbalists encoded knowledge not on parchment but in the plants themselves, selecting seeds from specific combinations of ancestry, soil, and season to preserve desired qualities: strength in frost, potency in medicine, resilience in drought. And by cultivating these plants in deliberate patterns year after year, the cloister effectively created libraries of living organisms that carried their accumulated wisdom in their very biology, so that a patch of lovage grown in the northern gardens held different secrets than the lovage of the western coast, and to harvest from these plants was, in a sense, to read the pages of an unbroken genetic text stretching back centuries. And now, as your breath deepens and the darkness folds itself around you like a cloak woven from night and memory, imagine the hidden scribes of the Green Cloister bending over their desks by candlelight, their quills moving slowly across parchment scented faintly with crushed lovage and sorrel, encoding truths too subtle for ordinary writing, their manuscripts locked away in stone vaults or hidden beneath herbs that whispered with the wisdom of countless seasons. And let your drifting thoughts rest upon the idea that even when books are burned and gardens uprooted, and guilds dissolve into dust, knowledge stored within seeds, rituals and stories persists like an ember in the ashes, waiting for the gentle hand of a dreamer to breathe it back to life. And now, gentle traveller drifting farther along the quiet currents of the night, may the faint torchlight of Winter's End Passage illuminate the hidden paths of your imagination, as we step beyond manuscripts and rituals and into the most secretive part of the Green Cloister's legacy: the initiation of new members, a process so quiet, so deeply symbolic, and so bound to the rhythm of the natural world that few outside the order ever knew of its existence. For becoming a guardian of the ancient vegetables required not only skill in gardening or knowledge of herbs, but a transformation of one's perception, patience, humility, and capacity to listen to the silent language of the living earth. If you allow your thoughts to drift into that hidden world, you might picture a young initiate standing barefoot at the edge of a moonlit garden, the cool soil pressing gently against their skin as they wait in stillness. For the first part of initiation, the oath of the first root required them to plant 3 seeds of Skirret, good King Henry and sorrel, without speaking a single word, not because silence was symbolic, but because the herbalists believed that seeds were sensitive to sound, and that the calm, unbroken quiet of night allowed them to hear the intention of the one who planted them, and the initiate's task was to let their breath, heartbeat, and thoughts fall into harmony with the subtle rhythms of the garden, a discipline that took many attempts and was often considered the true beginning of their path, for only those who could quiet themselves fully were thought ready to hear the voice of the land. The second stage of initiation, known as the Trial of the 3 Seasons, spanned an entire year and tested the initiate's ability to observe, adapt, and care for the plants under changing conditions. For the herbalists believed that true understanding of a plant required witnessing it in warmth, in cold, in growth, and in stillness. And so the initiate was tasked with tending a small patch of ancient vegetables through spring, summer, and winter without written instructions, relying entirely on intuition, observation, and the subtle cues the plants offered through color, texture and scent, and during this time they learned to recognize the faint pale sheen that signaled a thirsty leaf, the tremble of a stalk that warned of frost, the quiet droop that indicated nutrient-poor soil, and even the slight, almost imperceptible differences in fragrance that revealed whether the plant was thriving or merely surviving. A sensitivity so profound that seasoned herbalists could diagnose an entire garden simply by walking through it in silence. Success in the trial of the three seasons was not measured by perfection or yield, but by presence. By the initiate's willingness to remain in the garden during rainstorms, cold dawns, and starless nights, tending the plants with the same patience and curiosity one might offer a child or an elder. And many failed not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked the quiet endurance required to follow a plant's slow unfolding. Across the months, learning that wisdom grows gradually, imperceptibly, and cannot be rushed, a lesson mirrored in the forgotten vegetables themselves, which resisted the hurried demands of the modern world and thrived only when given time. The final stage of initiation, known only to the inner circle as the twilight ordination, took place not in the garden but deep within the cloister's stone halls, where elders of the order gathered around a long wooden table illuminated by candles made from beeswax infused with Lovage resin, the flickering flames casting fragrant warmth into the air. And there the initiate was asked to recount, not recite, the story of each plant they had tended, speaking in long, flowing narratives rather than lists of facts, for the Green Cloister believed that true understanding was shown not through memorization, but through storytelling, through the ability to weave a plant's nature, history, healing power, and personality into a single living narrative, a skill that required not only knowledge but heart, empathy, and a sense of kinship with the plants themselves. If the elders sensed sincerity, humility, and a genuine bond with the earth, they placed before the initiate a small clay vessel containing seeds from the cloister's oldest lineage, a blend of Lovage, sorrel, rampion, and groundnut, whose ancestry stretched back centuries, preserved carefully through wars, famine, and political upheavals, and the initiate would press their thumb lightly into the soft wax seal atop the vessel, leaving a mark that symbolized both commitment and continuity, an oath not to the order or its leaders, but to the plants themselves, a promise to protect, preserve, and pass on their ancient wisdom, no matter what changes the world outside might bring. And now, as your breath grows slow and steady, and the gentle pull of sleep gathers around your body like a cloak woven from dusk and forgotten time, imagine these initiates stepping quietly into the moonlit gardens after their ordination, clutching their clay vessels to their hearts, knowing that they had become part of an unbroken chain of guardians stretching back through centuries, each tending the ancient vegetables not out of obligation but out of reverence, love, and the recognition that some wisdom is too precious to lose. And let the thought rest gently in your drifting mind that perhaps somewhere in the present day, descendants of these hidden herbalists still walk the earth, protecting the last living threads of knowledge that once shaped the medieval world. And now, gentle dreamer, whose breath moves softly like mist across the quiet fields of memory, may the dim glow of Emberfen Abbey rise before your inner sight, as we journey into the most somber chapter of the Green Cloister's tale, for even the most devoted orders are not immune to the storms of history, and the guardians of the ancient vegetables, despite their wisdom, humility, and deep communion with the earth, eventually faced a tide of forces far greater than crops, seasons, or human frailty could withstand, forces woven from politics, fear, greed, and the relentless shifting of power that swept through the medieval world like a hidden wildfire, consuming not only people and places but knowledge itself, knowledge that had survived for centuries only to be threatened by a single troubled generation. If you let your thoughts drift into this trembling moment of transition, you might see a world teetering between old and new, cities swelling with restless ambition, noble estates expanding into lands once held in quiet stewardship, merchant guilds tightening their grip on trade routes, and the church, struggling to assert its authority in the face of growing secular power, casting wary eyes upon any group whose influence lay outside its reach. And the Green Cloister, with its secret manuscripts, ancient rituals, and deep botanical wisdom, suddenly seemed far too independent, far too self-sustaining, and far too connected to knowledge that could not be easily taxed, regulated, or controlled, marking them as a subtle but undeniable threat to the shifting order of the age. Rumors began first, quiet, uncertain murmurs spread by those who feared what they did not understand, whispers that the herbalists used forbidden magic to control the land, that their plants thrived unnaturally even in famine years, that their healing touched upon powers meant only for divine hands. And though the Green Cloister had always lived in harmony with monasteries and villagers alike, serving the sick, feeding the hungry, and teaching the young, the climate of suspicion grew like an invasive weed, fueled not by truth but by envy, misunderstanding, and the hunger of rising political factions to consolidate every form of knowledge under their own banners. Soon edicts were drafted, subtle at first, framed as regulations for public safety or trade consistency, restricting the cultivation of certain perennial vegetables, questioning the use of herbal remedies over church-sanctioned cures, and demanding that all written knowledge about plants be submitted to regional authorities for review. And though these decrees were framed in polite language, the herbalists recognized their true purpose to dismantle the independence of the Green Cloister and place its wisdom in the hands of those who neither understood nor respected the delicate balance the herbalists had maintained for centuries. The elders responded not with rebellion or protest, for such actions were foreign to their gentle nature, but with quiet sorrow and a solemn urgency, gathering in the twilight chambers beneath Emberfen Abbey to discuss how the manuscripts, seeds, and ancestral lineages could be preserved if the order was forced to disband. And it was during these hushed meetings that the plan of the last seed keepers was born, a covert alliance of the most trusted herbalists, chosen not for their rank but for their unwavering devotion to the plants, whose task would be to preserve the genetic and spiritual lineage of the 15 forgotten vegetables by scattering them across the world, entrusting each patch of knowledge to a different land, a different climate, a different people, ensuring that no single disaster or decree could extinguish them entirely. When the summons finally came, royal heralds demanding entry into the cloister, under the guise of inspection, the Green Cloister did not resist, but by then the seed keepers had already carried away the most precious treasures: clay vessels filled with the oldest Lovage seeds, bundles of Skirret roots wrapped in oiled wool, dried rampion blossoms stored between thin wooden slats, and small pouches of sorrel, chickweed, and groundnut, tied to their belts beneath their cloaks, and as they slipped silently into forests, mountains, and coastal villages under the cover of dawn, they carried not only the plants but the last unbroken threads of a living story, woven across generations. Back at the cloister, the officials found only empty beds, half-erased manuscripts, and a small number of elderly herbalists who remained behind, not to fight but to delay, to answer questions slowly, to guide searchers politely but ineffectively, buying the fleeing seed keepers precious hours to vanish into the wilderness. And though the Green Cloister was disbanded officially, and its grounds eventually repurposed, the heart of its heritage had already escaped into the world, scattered like seeds upon the wind, each carried by hands that understood both the urgency and the hope woven into their journey. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy, and the warmth of sleep settles gently across your limbs, imagine those seed keepers walking through moonlit forests, crossing frozen rivers, climbing mist-shrouded hills, each protecting their small bundle of life with a devotion deeper than fear, whispering old blessings into the night, as they planted hidden gardens in foreign soil, gardens that might one day become the last refuges of the ancient vegetables. And let your drifting thoughts rest upon the idea that every seed, no matter how small, carries within it the memory of those who protected it, cherished it, and believed that its survival mattered not only for food but for the story of humanity itself. And now, gentle wanderer drifting ever deeper into the quiet tapestry of forgotten centuries, may the soft breath of Farvel winds carry your thoughts as we follow the scattered seed keepers into lands far from the stone walls of the green cloister. For the exodus of the ancient vegetables did not end with their flight into the forests, but unfolded into a long pilgrimage that crossed mountains, rivers, coastlines, and borders, shaping small pockets of survival where the lineage of these plants took root in secret, each fragment of the old knowledge adapting to new landscapes and new caretakers, weaving a hidden map across the world that only the most attentive historians and botanists can still faintly trace. If you allow your mind to drift into these wandering paths, you might see one of the seed keepers, a quiet woman named Fenella of the northern fells, travelling beneath the shelter of pine forests, carrying with her a bundle of Skirret roots wrapped in wool soaked with beeswax, each root still alive, breathing faintly within the darkness. And after many nights of walking under the cold stars, she found refuge in a remote mountain hamlet, where the soil was cool, the springs were clear, and the winters long, and there she planted the first hidden garden of exile, a small, unassuming patch behind a shepherd's hut where Skirret, sorrel and lovage slowly stretched their roots into the new land, adapting to the high altitude and harsh winds with the quiet resilience that had sustained them for centuries. Another seed keeper, Brother Anselm of Greycliff, wandered south through marshlands and mist, guided only by constellations and the instinctive pull of fertile ground, until he reached a coastal fishing village where the soil was poor, but the sea breeze carried life. And there he planted Sea Kale among the dunes, choosing a corner of the shoreline where the villagers' footsteps rarely wandered, and the plant, recognizing the salt, the wind, and the shifting sands, took hold eagerly, growing in quiet companionship with the gulls, the driftwood, and the tide, becoming, in time, a secret guardian of a coast that would one day forget it had ever hosted such a plant. Further east, in forested lowlands where rivers curled like silver ribbons across the earth, the young herbalist Sedwin carried a small clay jar filled with rampion seeds tucked beneath his cloak, and after weeks of evading patrols, hunger, and the suspicion of townsfolk, he found shelter among a community of woodcutters who lived in harmony with the deep forest. And there he planted rampion and chickweed beside a clearing, kissed by pale morning light, teaching the woodcutters' children how to harvest the leaves gently, how to dry the seeds, and how to honor the ancient stories that had once surrounded these plants, stories that seemed almost magical to the children, but were, in truth, the final surviving threads of the green cloister's memory. In distant valleys on forgotten islands, and within secluded monastic enclaves, the seed keeper's knowledge spread subtly, quietly, like roots beneath snow. In some places the plants flourished wildly, adapting to climates far different from their birthplace, developing new shades of flavor, strength, and resilience. In others they struggled but persisted, clinging to life like tiny embers of an extinguished fire. And though many seed keepers died before they could teach their full knowledge, the plants themselves became teachers, revealing their secrets through their growth cycles, scents, and subtle interactions with the land, offering guidance to those who tended them intuitively, even without the manuscripts that had once guided the green cloister's hands. Generations passed, kingdoms rose and fell, languages shifted, and borders redrew themselves across the face of the continent. Yet the ancient vegetables endured in faint, scattered lines, a patch of good King Henry growing stubbornly behind an abandoned shepherd's hut, a tangle of groundnut vines climbing over forgotten stone ruins, a cluster of borage flowers turning their star-shaped faces toward the sun in a deserted monastery garden. And though the people living beside these plants no longer remembered their origins, they kept them simply because they tasted good, or healed the stomach, or grew even in bad years, unaware that they were the custodians of an unbroken lineage, stretching back to a vanished cloister, and a world that had nearly forgotten itself. But not all the seeds found safe havens, for storms, wars, wildfires, and shifting climates swallowed many of the hidden gardens, and in some regions the ancient vegetables vanished entirely, existing only in scraps of story, faint botanical illustrations in old herbals, or curious local sayings whose meaning had dissolved into time. Yet even in loss there was resilience, for the seed keepers had never relied on a single sanctuary. They had scattered their living knowledge like stars across the night sky, ensuring that even when darkness fell in one land, the light of the old vegetables survived in another, each garden a small, stubborn defiance against the forces that sought to erase the past. And now, as your thoughts soften and your breath deepens into the gentle rhythm of rest, imagine these scattered gardens glowing faintly beneath moonlight and frost, tiny sanctuaries of survival woven across mountains, forests, coasts, and islands, each one tended by hands long gone and hands yet to come, each one carrying within its soil the memory of the green cloister and the enduring truth that knowledge lives as long as something grows. And let your drifting mind rest peacefully in the idea that the ancient vegetables, though forgotten by most, endured through the quiet loyalty of those who believed that even the smallest seed can change the course of the world. And now, gentle dream wanderer drifting deeper into the warm twilight of ancestral memory, may the soft shimmer of Hearthglen mist invite your thoughts into the quiet truth that even the smallest, most forgotten gardens can influence the fate of entire communities. For the scattered sanctuaries planted by the last seed keepers did not simply survive in secret. They quietly shaped the course of local history, sometimes saving whole villages from starvation, sometimes healing wounds that no physician could mend, and sometimes becoming the silent origin of legends, customs, or superstitions that lingered long after the names of the plants themselves had faded from human tongues. If you let your mind drift into one such moment, you might see a snowbound mountain village in the heart of a brutal winter, when game vanished from the forests, grain stores dwindled to dust, and families huddled beside weak fires praying for spring. And in that bleak season, an elderly shepherd remembered the small patch of Skirret, planted generations earlier behind a now abandoned cottage, a patch he had tended out of habit rather than understanding, and when he dug through the frozen earth with numb fingers, he found the pale, sweet roots still alive beneath the frost, untouched by the cold, and these roots, boiled into broth or roasted over glowing embers, carried the village through the final hungry weeks before the thaw, and though no one realized it, their survival was owed to the legacy of a seed keeper, whose footsteps had faded centuries earlier into the mountain mists. Travel farther across time and you might witness a coastal hamlet threatened by scurvy during a long season of failed trade ships and violent storms, when no citrus or wine reached their shores, and yet one wise fisherwoman, recalling a half-forgotten tradition taught by her grandmother, harvested sea kale from the rugged dunes and served it raw, steamed or pickled to her neighbors, its potent vitamin-rich leaves restoring strength to limbs swollen with sickness. And though the villagers later told tales of a miraculous shoreweed, blessed by the spirits of the sea, they never knew that they were consuming the descendant of a plant carried to their homeland by a seed keeper who had fled persecution long before their village even existed. In a forested region once troubled by frequent illness, a small cluster of cottages became known for the strange resilience of its people, who recovered faster from fever and rarely succumbed to winter ailments. And the secret lay not in charms or prayers, but in a humble pot of Lovage broth prepared each evening by an old herbalist, whose garden traced its lineage back to the green cloister. Her broth, rich in anti-inflammatory compounds, eased swelling, calmed pain, opened the lungs, and strengthened weary bones, and though villagers believed her kitchen was blessed by a saint or forest spirit, the truth was simpler and older. She had inherited seeds selected for potency by generations of plant guardians, who understood the deep medicinal power woven into the veins of the Lovage plant. Another fragment of influence can be found in a lowland farming village that suffered a devastating flood, washing away crops and barns alike. Yet when the waters receded, A patch of sorrel growing beside the riverbank remained untouched, its roots anchoring the soil so firmly that the villagers interpreted its survival as a sign of divine protection, and they carried sorrel leaves into their rebuilding rituals, placing them beneath new foundations for good fortune, never realizing that sorrel's true gift was not magic, but remarkable resilience born from centuries of careful cultivation by the green cloister, whose gardeners understood how to select for strength in both flavor and survival. And perhaps the most touching of all these hidden influences can be found in a story told for generations in a woodland village, where chickweed grew in colossal, almost unbelievable abundance, covering forest floors and cottage walls with its soft, star-shaped flowers. And during a year of drought, when wells dried and streams sank into cracked earth, the villagers survived by collecting chickweed each dawn, its tender leaves offering water, nourishment, and healing in a single bite. And long after droughts ceased, the villagers spoke of a benevolent forest spirit that had fed them, never knowing that their salvation had come from the quiet persistence of a plant, carried there by a seed keeper, who believed that every land deserved a patch of green that could endure even when all else failed. But these stories, though subtle, marked the survival of more than food. They carried forward a fragmented memory of the green cloister's teachings, woven unconsciously into folklore, customs, and traditions. Children plucking borage flowers to chase sadness from their mothers, elders placing rampion seeds in marriage chests for good fortune, sailors carving sea kale leaves into talismans for safe journeys, farmers planting good King Henry at the borders of their fields to welcome spring, even though they no longer knew why. All these rituals echoing across generations like whispers from the forgotten past, faint reminders of a wisdom nearly extinguished, but somehow always alive, rooted in the soil of memory rather than in parchment or stone. And now, as your breath grows slow and the weight of sleep gathers gently upon your body, imagine these hidden gardens glowing like quiet embers scattered across the medieval world, each one a small oasis of survival, resilience, and hope, each one a reminder that even when great knowledge is scattered and nearly lost, its influence can ripple softly through centuries, touching lives in ways unseen. And let your drifting thoughts find comfort in the idea that the ancient vegetables did not fade into extinction. They lived on in stories, in meals, in traditions, and in the quiet, stubborn persistence of seeds carried by hands that believed the old world was worth preserving. And now, gentle sleeper, whose thoughts drift like soft lanterns across the twilight of ancient memory, may the warm hush of dawn's reach meadow settle gently upon your mind, as we bring our long wandering story to its quiet close, for the tale of the forgotten medieval vegetables, of the seed keepers who saved them, of the hidden gardens that sheltered them, and of the villages that unknowingly owed their survival to them, converges at last in the calm breath of the modern world, where curious botanists, wandering historians, and humble gardeners, guided by nothing more than instinct or chance, began to stumble upon faint traces of the old lineage scattered across forgotten landscapes, patches of sorrel thriving beside ruined monasteries, clusters of skirret pushing through the soil of abandoned cottages, strands of groundnut climbing over stones long reclaimed by forest moss, and small pockets of lovage growing with inexplicable vigor beside streams that no longer remember the hands that planted them. As scientists collected samples and compared their leaves, roots, and flowers to herbarium records and early manuscripts, they noticed anomalies: unusual resilience in winter, richer mineral profiles, unexpected medicinal potency, and flavors so vivid they startled even seasoned researchers. And with each discovery came the dawning realization that these plants were not simply wild variants, but survivors of an ancient agricultural world that had nearly vanished, the living echo of the green cloister's last act of protection. Their survival a quiet defiance against centuries of neglect, conflict, and change, proving that the wisdom woven into their lineage had endured like a hidden ember glowing patiently beneath the ashes of time. Modern gardeners, charmed by their beauty, adopted them without knowing their lineage. Chefs rediscovered their flavors, and carried them into kitchens where new traditions blossomed around forgotten roots. Herbalists marveled at their healing strength and recognized in them the same properties described in medieval manuscripts, and environmentalists, observing their resilience in harsh soil, praised their regenerative qualities, awakening the understanding, slowly, gently, that these plants were not relics of the past, but guides toward a more sustainable future, whispering old truths to a world that had forgotten how to listen to the earth. And so, the circle completed itself. Seeds once carried in secrecy beneath cloaks during the fall of the Green Cloister were now planted openly in sunlit gardens. Wisdom once hidden in coded manuscripts was now rediscovered in the quiet language of roots and leaves, and traditions once fading into folklore began to stir again in the hands of those who cultivated these vegetables with curiosity, delight, and reverence, renewing a bond between human and land that had been neglected but never truly broken, for the plants had waited patiently, growing wherever they could, preserving their knowledge within every cell, every fiber, every breath of their living bodies, until the world was ready to receive it again. And now, as sleep rises softly to meet your resting thoughts, imagine all the ancient gardens of the past and present merging into one vast peaceful tapestry: moonlit vegetable beds, shimmering with dew, old stone walls warmed by sunlight, scattered seeds drifting gently on the breeze, and the timeless, unspoken promise that as long as something grows, as long as a single hand chooses to plant, nurture, and remember, the wisdom of the old world will never fade, but will continue to breathe through the quiet resilience of the earth, reminding us that every leaf holds a story, every root carries a memory, and every seed contains within it the miracle of beginning again. And so, gentle dreamer, our tale rests here, not truly ending, but settling into the soft soil of your imagination, where it may take root, grow slowly, and accompany you into sleep like a warm cloak woven of ancient secrets and the quiet, patient love of the living earth.